Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here. Way back in 1994, I started playing Magic the Gathering. Um, I was kind of forced at that point to learn from the rule book, so I had to actually read the rule book and learn what all the terminology was and all of that stuff because, as you can imagine, in 1994, I was still on dial up and the internet was still kind of in its infancy. We didn't have nearly the resources that we have today on the internet, and so it was a learning process. By 1998, 1999, I had started playing competitively in tournaments. When I started, I wanted to go because I thought it would be cool to be with a bunch of like-minded people who are all playing a game that we all enjoyed. But the scene during that time was very toxic. The veteran players, the seasoned Magic players, saw new players as just easy points, and because of that, they had no intention of teaching you how to play. They had no intention of teaching you your mistakes or showing you the tricks behind their deck because they were afraid that if you learn those tricks, they would stop beating you. And that is kind of where the competitive scene for Magic was at that particular time. And again, 1998, 1999, we were still in a internet infancy, kind of. I mean, it was starting to shape up. You could find net decks, as they put it, online, but really tutorial videos didn't exist yet. So it was difficult to learn how to become a better player. I had to mimic what the better players were doing. I had to watch how they were playing. I had to see what they were playing, and I had to mimic the behaviors and the, I suppose, actions, if you will, that they were doing, because it was the only way I was going to learn. They weren't going to teach me. So I wanted to kind of eliminate that if I could by creating a tutorial video that was aimed at people like me when I was younger, people who are absolute beginners. So first off and foremost, this is not meant for seasoned players. It is not meant for people who have played card games before. If you're not a beginner, a lot of this information doesn't really matter to you because you've already played enough. I would also ask that we avoid any toxic comments. If you aren't a beginner, don't bother watching the video and don't bother leaving any comments because there's no point in putting negativity into this channel. People are here to learn. Okay, so we're going to go over, when you look at any normal rule book, I don't know if you can find old Magic rule books anymore. I'm sure you could. They always start out with card layouts, and actually most card games in their beginning stages have rule books, and they all start out with the same thing with card types. So what we're looking at today is basic lands. Okay, this is what a basic land will look like. I have an example of an older basic land. It is, however, in Korean, but there is something that I wanted to point out as far as differences here. So if you look at both of these lands, they are both basic mountains. The big difference that I wanted to point out here obviously isn't the language, but you'll see that there's actually text in the text box. The reason I want to point that out is because the original basic lands, when they were first printing them, did have text in the text box indicating what they did. They've since obviously gotten rid of that for something more along the lines like this, because what a basic land does is pretty obvious, which we'll go into more detail for the beginning players. But this is your resource system right here. These are your resource system. These are the basic lands. There are 5 types of basic lands: swamp, island, plains, mountain, forest. Okay, and they create mana based on what they are: green mana, red mana, white mana, blue mana, black mana. Okay, so when you hear somebody say I'm tapping this for green, that's what they mean. They're tapping it for green mana. Okay, so that is a basic land. There are, however, non-basic lands. So you're going to see these as well. And you can tell the difference because instead of saying basic, it literally just says land. Okay, so that's the only difference between a basic land and a non-basic land. Non-basic lands come in a bunch of different colors and flavors and do a lot of different things. What you need to know is that they do not count as basic lands. That's the most important thing about it. What they do will always be indicated in their text box, and as I go into more tutorial videos, I'll show you what all of that means. We'll go into the lingo. You're also going to see several different types of spells. Anything that you cast from your hand is considered a spell, okay? It does not matter whether it is a creature, whether it is an enchantment, whether it is an artifact, it still counts as a spell being cast from your hand. Once it resolves, it will have different identification, but when it's being cast from your hand, it counts as a spell. Okay? There are two types of spells that once they resolve, they immediately go to your discard pile. We've got instants and we've got sorceries. Okay? An instant you can play anytime. It does not matter what point in time in the game it is. It could be at the beginning of your turn. It could be at the end of your turn. It could be at the end of your opponent's turn. It could be during your opponent's turn. It could be during combat. You can play instants at any point in time. When it happens, assuming your opponent has no response, you will resolve the effect and you'll put it in your discard pile. Sorceries differ because they can only be played during your turn. You can only play sorceries during your turn. Okay? Sorceries are the same thing as instants beyond that point. Once you play it, you resolve the effect, you put it into your discard pile. You're also going to have artifacts. Artifacts are a type of permanent. Okay? A permanent is a type of spell that when it resolves, stays on the battlefield. Okay? Lands also count as permanents. They don't count as spells being cast, but they do count as permanents. Okay? So we have artifacts. Artifacts are a type of permanent and count as a spell being cast from your hand. There are different types of artifacts. We have just plain artifacts. An artifact tends to represent something that is physical, that has either been crafted or exists as a physical something in life. Okay, so like for instance, a backpack, a chair, a mountain. Well, maybe not a mountain. Obviously, a mountain you can use to tap for red mana, but like you get what I'm saying. Things like a house, a shelf, a book, a quill, things like that. You're going to have a casting cost right here. Okay. In the upper right-hand corner of all spells, you're going to have a casting cost. So on our sorcery and even on our instant, we have a casting cost. That is the amount of mana that it requires to play this spell. I'll go into the specifics on that, but just know that this is the cost of this particular card. A normal artifact just represents something that sometimes has a passive ability and sometimes has activated abilities. What those do, I'll go into detail in another video, but what you should know is that it is an artifact, that's the name, and that's the casting cost. You're also going to find some that say artifact equipment. These differ in the sense that they can be equipped to a creature. All right, there's an equip cost right here. Sometimes they have multiple equip costs that are determinant on what kind of creature it is being attached to. Okay, I'll go into greater detail, obviously, in another video. Just know that this is an artifact that is also designated as an equipment. That'll come up sometimes, just understand the difference. And last but not least, you're also going to find artifact creatures. Okay. Whenever you have an artifact, well, actually, whenever you have a creature, you're also going to have something following it, determining what type of creature it is. In this case, it is a construct. So we have an artifact, creature, construct. Okay, that's how much it costs. This is its text box. The difference between a creature and every other type of spell in Magic is that a creature will always have a power and toughness. Power is the first number. Toughness is the second number. Power indicates how much damage it deals. Toughness is how much damage it can receive before it dies. Okay, so this is a 4/5. Another type of permanent you're going to see in this game are enchantments. There are different types of enchantments. There are enchantments that are known as global enchantments, which are passive enchantments that stay in play. In this particular case, it has a passive ability and an activated ability. And they just augment play until they are removed. Okay. This is the casting cost right there, and its type. You will also see enchantments that say Enchantment Aura. The thing you need to know about an Enchantment Aura is that an Enchantment Aura will always be enchanting some sort of something on the battlefield. Okay? In this particular case, it says that it enchants a non-land permanent. Okay? Sometimes it will say enchant creature. Sometimes it will say enchant land. Sometimes it will say enchant player. What that means is, in this particular case, if I had this artifact in play, because an artifact is a non-land permanent, because it is not a land and it is a permanent, I would use this to enchant that specific creature. Okay. Whereas this one, when it is put into play, it will have a passive ability that is affecting the battlefield, but not specifically anything, and sometimes has an activated ability in this case. An enchantment aura will always be affecting something very specific. In this case, it's enchanting a non-land permanent. Sometimes it is enchanting a land, a creature, or a player. That's all you need to know about that for now. I will go into greater detail on these cards later. The last permanent type that you're going to see... I take that back. That isn't the last permanent type there. There's one other type that I've forgotten. But another type of permanent type that you're going to see are creatures. Okay, I'm going to actually show you these ones. All right, so we have creatures. Creatures, like I said, you'll know the difference between a creature based off of this right here where it says creature, also by the power and toughness. Okay. As I mentioned before, anytime you have a creature, it's also going to tell you the type of creature it is. In this case, it is a Merfolk Wizard. It tells you that it is a Soothsayer Adept. This is the mana cost. This is the power and toughness. It can deal 1 damage. It can take up to 3 damage before it dies. Another creature, Combat Professor, is a creature, bird, cleric, has a power of 2, a toughness of 3, which means it can deal 2 damage, it can withstand a total of 3 damage before dying. This, you'll notice, has a different border on the top than this type of creature, because this is a legendary creature. Legendary creatures are important because you can only ever have one of these types of creatures in play at any given time. So I can only ever have one Quintorius Field Historian in play at any given time. If I have a Quintorius Field Historian in play, my opponent cannot play a Quintorius Field Historian. More importantly, if I choose to play a second Quintorius Field Historian, I have to exile, which means to remove it from the game, one of the 2 copies that I own, because you cannot have more than one legendary creature of the specific type, in this case Quintorius, in play at any given time. That doesn't mean that I can't have more than one legendary card in play. If I had a Rutha, I could still have a Quintorius, I just couldn't have another Rutha. Okay? Legendary isn't specific to creatures. Legendary can be on pretty much any type of card. You can have legendary lands, you can have legendary artifacts, you can have legendary instants, you can have legendary enchantments, you can have legendary sorceries. Legendary is not specific to a type of card. Those are the card types. There are 2 card types that I'm missing here. One of them is equipment. So I'm going to go ahead and find one of those. And one of those is Planeswalker. So let me just go find one really quick. Okay, sorry, I'm back. I misspoke. First off, I said that there was two permanent types that I had missed, and when I mentioned that, I said one of them was equipment, and I totally meant vehicle, not equipment. So one of the permanent types that I had missed was vehicles, but I actually missed planeswalkers as well, which is one that I had mentioned. I also missed sagas. Sagas are relatively new, so I'm going to go into each of these. Starting with the vehicle. So this is an artifact type, and you'll see it right there, artifact. But it's also a vehicle, and you'll see the border on a vehicle is very different from the border on most normal artifacts. Vehicles will have a power and toughness because a vehicle can be manned, which I will go into greater detail in a future video. But here we have the name, the mana cost, the type, artifact vehicle, and its power and toughness. This is an example of another permanent that would be in play. Okay. The next one up is going to be a Planeswalker. Planeswalkers are usually all mythic. If you played during War of the Spark, they experimented with having uncommon and rare Planeswalkers. I still think that's something they should look into because it creates an accessibility to players that don't necessarily have $1 million to spend on Magic the Gathering. But usually Planeswalkers are in the mythic rare tier. You're going to have a name here. You're also going to have a mana cost there, and then you're going to see it says Legendary Planeswalker, and then who it is, followed by a little symbol right here, which indicates how much loyalty it has when it comes into play. And then over here, some symbols with an up and a down and a number in there. So this one says +1, this one says -2, and this one says -3. The +1 indicates adding loyalty to it, so we'll jump it from a 4 to a 5. The -2 is removing, and the -3 is removing loyalty. When you add loyalty to it, you'll do an ability. When you remove loyalty from it, you'll do an ability, so on and so forth. I'll go into much greater detail on Planeswalkers in a different video, because right now we're just touching card types and what you should expect to see. Okay, and then the final one is going to be sagas. They are also enchantments, but they say Enchantment Saga. A saga is a special type of enchantment that when it comes into play, it's going to have an effect, and then the following next 2 turns, it's going to have an effect, and then after it's had those effects, it is going to be put into your discard pile. Okay, so it's a type of enchantment that slowly goes away. And it's indicated as a storytelling device almost. Each of the sagas is telling a different story from a different part of whatever set that it is included in 3 steps. Okay, so those are the different types of cards that you're going to see in Magic the Gathering. There are quite a few different types, and they can be very intimidating, but they are actually pretty simple to understand. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to go into greater details on all of this, as well as how to set up, what does it mean to have, what does untap upkeep draw phase mean, all of this stuff as basic tutorial, so that you can understand how to play this game as best you can. What I want to ask is that when you see these cards, don't be intimidated by them. We're going to go into greater detail on what a mana cost is. We're going to go into greater detail about non-basic lands, about planeswalkers, what each artifact type does, so on and so forth. Okay. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. And I invite you to leave comments below. I will ask that you refrain from negativity and any toxic comments. These videos are not meant for pro players. They're not meant for seasoned players. They're not meant for people who have played Magic the Gathering before. These are meant for beginners, people who do not know how to play, who are intimidated by it, who want to get into the scene but don't know how. Okay. And until next time, guys, peace.